Good evening, this is Benjamin. Diolch yn fawr, thank you for coming. I have something tonight which I feel is very important for all of the Celtic nations, what I consider to be the most important document, especially for Wales, Ireland and Scottish Gaelic in the Hebrides, in terms of being surrounded by English and we needing laws and new ways to combat this in order to survive and grow and expand as a culture. And the document which I consider to be the most important for that over the last 100 years is Le Charte de la Langue Française, passed by the National Assembly of Québec in 1977, drafted by a man named Camille Laurent, who in this described Quebec as the Quebec nation. That's important. Defining nation by linguistic identity. This was revolutionary, and it ensured much of what would follow in Quebec over the last 45 and more years in terms of the growth, stabilization, and strengthening of their identity and culture as a people. Now this is part of a bigger, or rather longer video. This is just the preamble to that important law, Law 101, Bill 101. It's crucial that we who speak a Celtic language understand what this did, why it was done, and the language used, which we don't use enough of in our own cultures. And I think it's important enough that I'm going to read this. I've written this out by hand just to read to you. So enjoy these images of Quebec. And I'm going to read for you what I consider to be essential for we Celtic speakers to know about. This is the preamble of that law. Whereas the French language, the distinctive language of a people that is in the majority French-speaking, is the instrument by which that people has articulated its identity. Whereas the National Assembly of Quebec recognizes that Quebecers wish to see the quality and influence of French language assured, and is resolved therefore to make French the language of government and law, as well as the normal everyday language of work, instruction, communication, commerce, and business. Whereas the National Assembly recognizes that French is the only common language of the Quebec nation, and that it is essential that all be aware of the importance of the French language and Quebec culture as the elements that bind society together. And whereas it is resolved, therefore, to ensure that everyone has access to learning French and to perfecting knowledge and mastery of the language, and to make French the language of instruction. Whereas the National Assembly intends to pursue this objective in a spirit of fairness and open-mindedness, respectful of the institutions of the English-speaking community of Quebec, and respectful of ethnic minorities whose valuable contribution to the development of Quebec it readily acknowledges. Whereas the National Assembly of Quebec recognizes the right of First Nations and the Inuit in Quebec, the first inhabitants of this land, to preserve their language and culture. Whereas Quebec is the only French-speaking state in North America and shares a long history with the Francophone and Acadian communities of Canada. And whereas that confers a special responsibility on Quebec which intends to play a leading role within La Francophonie. Whereas these observations and intentions are in keeping with a new perception of the worth and national cultures in all parts of the earth, and of the obligation of every people to contribute in its special way to the international community. Whereas, in accordance with parliamentary sovereignty, it is incumbent on the Parliament of Quebec to confirm the status of French as the official language and common language in the territory of Quebec, and to enshrine in paramountcy of that status in Quebec's legal order, while ensuring a balance between the collective rights of the Quebec nation and human rights and freedoms. Therefore, Her Majesty, with the advice and consent of the National Assembly of Quebec, enacts as follows. Merci d'avoir écouté ce préambule et pour passer le temps. I appreciate it. Now, as I said, this is going to be part of a longer video comparing Quebec with Cymru, Wales. But this part is essential enough that I wanted to give to you on its own that reading out of the preamble. Reflect on what it means, what it could mean for Wales or Ireland or other such nations if they adopted these ideas. It's revolutionary, and not in a Marxist way, in the sense of cultural identity and the nation, not dividing the nation into classes, but the nation itself being one, and other nations not being one with us. That's nationalism, but from the perspective of a responsibility and a duty to give our strength to the world by being strong, and to give that culture to the world by being that culture. And I'll go into that more in the longer video. Thank you so much for watching.